The wind moved like an old prayer across the plains, slow and hollow, carrying the taste of dust and iron. Evening had fallen hard over the New Mexico frontier, the kind of cold that gnawed through bone and made the land seem endless. The sun bled out behind the red mesas, leaving behind a sky bruised purple and gray. Eli Whitlock stood by the corral gate, coat collar turned up, one gloved hand resting on the post. The horses were restless, they could feel the storm coming. He'd lived alone for years now, long enough that silence had become a second language. His ranch sat 30 miles from the nearest town, a scatter of weathered boards and empty fields. The sound of his own boots on the frost-crusted earth was often the only heartbeat he heard. He'd buried his wife long before the war ended and learned to live with what the world had taken. Most nights, he spoke to the fire, or to the horse that had carried him through hell and back. He was bringing in a coil of rope when something caught his eye by the far end of the barn. A shape in the snow, faint and motionless. For a moment, he thought it might have been a coyote that had wandered too close. But when the wind shifted, he saw the pale edge of fabric fluttering weakly. He froze, listening. Nothing but the low moan of wind through the willows. Eli set the rope aside and started toward the barn, boots crunching through the frost. The air smelled of dry hay and smoke from his chimney. As he neared, the outline sharpened, a woman crumpled near the wall, her hair tangled with straw and ice. He dropped to one knee beside her. Her face was gray beneath the dirt, lips cracked, breath shallow. She looked young, 20 maybe less. Her dress hung in tatters, shoes worn through to bare skin. He touched her shoulder gently. She flinched and tried to move, but her body had no strength left. "Easy," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "You're all right. Just hold still." She didn't answer, just shivered violently, eyes fluttering beneath half-closed lids. When he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing. That scared him more than the silence. Her hands were cold as stone, and when he brushed the dirt away, he noticed something clasped tight in her fist, a small silver locket dull with age. It swung open as he carried her toward the cabin, the clasp giving way with a soft click. Inside was a drawing faint and childlike, a woman and a little boy holding hands, both smiling. He snapped it shut before the meaning could hit too deep. Inside, the cabin was dim and warm. The fire popped and threw long shadows over the floorboards. Eli laid her on his bed, pulled a wool blanket over her, and crouched by the hearth. The kettle was still warm. He poured what water was left into a tin cup, stirred in a little sugar, and held it to her lips. She drank in small, desperate sips, eyes never opening. He sat there for a while, watching the firelight dance across her face. There was a line of exhaustion in her features he recognized too well, the kind that comes from running too far too long. Her fingers still clutched the locket even in sleep. He couldn't make himself pry it away. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and relentless. He rose, fed the fire, then stepped to the window. The horizon was gone, just gray air and wind. Somewhere out there, something or someone had driven this woman to his doorstep. He didn't know who, and he didn't ask. When he turned back, she was murmuring. He couldn't catch the words, but her voice was trembling, full of fear. Her hand twitched against the blanket, like she was reaching for someone. He pulled a chair close and sat, elbows on his knees. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if she could hear. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She calmed after a while, her breathing settling into a fragile rhythm. The fire's glow softened the hard edges of the room, and the storm outside beat steady against the shutters. He thought about carrying her to town come morning, about finding the doctor or the marshal. But something inside him pushed against that thought. She didn't look like someone who trusted lawmen. He didn't sleep that night. Each hour that passed felt heavy, like the world was waiting for him to decide something that couldn't be undone. When dawn finally broke, it came pale and brittle. He rose, poured himself coffee, and checked on the woman. Her eyes were open. They were soft brown, unfocused at first, then sharp with alarm as she saw him. She tried to sit up, but he lifted a hand. "Don't. You'll tear your stitches." Her voice was raw, barely there. Where am I?" "Whitlock Ranch," he said. "North of the river. You've been out cold since last night." She looked around the cabin, the fire, the table, the old rifle by the door, then back to him. You could have left me out there. He poured water into a clean cup and handed it to her.
Didn't seem right.
Her hand trembled as she took it.
Why?
He hesitated, staring into the fire. You were still breathing. That seemed to surprise her more than kindness itself. She drank, slow and cautious, as if expecting poison. He noticed the faint scar that ran along her wrist, the dirt beneath her nails, the way her eyes darted toward the window every few seconds. Whoever she was, she'd been running a long time. He handed her a small bowl of beans and bread, and she ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days.
Between bites, she glanced at him.
You live here alone?
Mostly. No wife? No children? He shook his head. Not anymore.
Her gaze softened, but she didn't press. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy, meaningful, like two souls too tired to fill it with talk. When she finished eating, she sat back, still clutching that locket. Her eyes flicked to it, then away, as though the sight burned.
Thank you, she whispered. Eli nodded once.
You can rest here till you're strong enough to move on. She looked toward the door again, expression tightening. They'll be looking for me.
Who?
Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Instead, she sank back under the blanket, closing her eyes as if to hide from whatever she'd almost said. Eli stood by the window long after she'd fallen asleep again. The snow had stopped, leaving a world white and soundless. The barn roof gleamed under the early light, and smoke from the chimney curled upward like a fragile thread.
He should have felt peace.
Instead, unease crept into his chest, sharp and familiar. He thought of the locket again, the crude drawing, the small hands clasped in ink. It wasn't just a keepsake.
It was a promise.
And promises, he knew, were the hardest things to keep in this land. The storm came at night, whispering first through the valley before it began to howl. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a desperate hand, rattling the windows and sweeping snow beneath the door. Inside, the fire crackled and hissed, fighting back the cold with what little strength it had left. Eli Whitlock moved slowly around the room, tending to the woman on his bed as though she were made of glass. He'd laid her near the hearth where the warmth was strongest. Her skin was still pale, her hair damp from the melted frost. She slept like someone trapped between worlds, one hand clenched around that little silver locket, her chest rising shallow and uneven. Eli kept the kettle close to the flame, letting it sing low. When the steam fogged the rim, he poured it into a bowl and mixed in a pinch of salt and herbs, the only medicine he knew. She stirred when he touched her wrist, eyes fluttering open for a moment.
Don't, she whispered, voice thin and frightened. Please.
Easy now, he said quietly. Ain't no one here gonna harm you. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to him. She didn't seem to believe it, but she let him lift her head and press the spoon to her lips. She drank, trembling, then sank back into the blanket. He sat there for a while, watching her fight for sleep again. The wind howled harder outside, shaking snow from the roof, but in that small cabin, time moved slower than the storm. Eli leaned back in the chair by the fire, rubbing his hands together. He hadn't spoken this many words in a week, maybe longer. The woman's presence stirred something buried deep, not love, not yet, but memory. The memory of tending to someone who trusted him once. Of warmth in the quiet before war, before death, before years of dust and solitude. When she woke again, the storm was still raging. The fire had burned low, painting the room in amber light. She turned her head toward him, eyes heavy but awake this time. What's your name? She asked, barely more than a breath.
Eli, he said. Whitlock. She nodded faintly. You found me. Out by the barn, he replied.
Looked like you hadn't eaten in days. Her lips moved, as if she wanted to say something, but she only closed her eyes again. Eli went to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Snow covered everything, the fence, the corral, the tracks leading down to the stream. Whatever trail she'd come from was gone now, erased by the night. He turned back, feeling a strange unease he couldn't name. Maybe it was the quiet way she'd looked at him, like she was already half a ghost. Or maybe it was the locket she clung to like a soul she couldn't afford to lose. He poured a little coffee and sat again by the fire, boots stretched toward the heat. The cabin was small, one bed, one table, shelves lined with old jars and tools. Her breathing filled the space between the creaks of the storm. At times she whimpered softly, not from pain but from whatever chased her in dreams. By dawn, the storm had begun to break. Pale light crept through the cracks of the shutters. Eli stepped outside for a moment, boots sinking deep into the snow. The air was sharp, alive with silence. He could see his breath curl in front of him. The land looked peaceful, but peace in the frontier was only ever borrowed. When he came back in, she was sitting up, wrapped in the blanket. She watched him with wary eyes.
"You didn't have to help me," she said.
He set his gloves on the table. "Didn't figure I needed a reason." Her gaze lingered on him. "Most men out here don't do things without one." Eli looked at the fire. "Most men out here don't sleep much at night either." She studied him, as if trying to understand the kind of man he was. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was thick, weighted by something unspoken. He poured her another cup of broth, and this time she took it without hesitation. "Where were you headed?" he asked after a while. Her eyes fell to the flames.
"South," she said quietly. "Didn't matter where."
"Just away."
"From what?" She didn't answer.
The sound of the wind filled the space again, carrying flakes against the window like tiny knocks. Eli didn't push further. He'd seen too many people with ghosts on their backs. Some things couldn't be asked, not yet. After she ate, she tried to stand. He moved to steady her, his hand brushing her arm. Her skin was warm now, her strength returning. She looked up at him, startled by the touch, then didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. He gave a small nod. "You'll need rest a few more days. I'll fetch some supplies when the road clears."
She hesitated.
"You'd ride out in that?"
He shrugged.
"Snow don't scare me. Done worse for less reason." She smiled faintly, the first time he'd seen any sign of softness in her. It struck him hard, that smile. It was fragile but real, like sunlight through storm clouds. The day passed slow. He fixed the hinges on the barn door while she slept again, the rhythm of hammer and wood echoing through the stillness. Every so often, he caught himself glancing back toward the window, half expecting to see riders cresting the ridge. He didn't know why. Just a feeling in his gut that trouble didn't leave tracks you could see. By evening, the storm was gone. The land lay white and still beneath a swollen moon. He sat at the table with his coffee, and she stirred in her sleep. Her hand twitched toward her chest, clutching the locket. Then she spoke, just one word, but it froze him where he sat. "Daniel." Eli frowned, leaning forward. Her voice was trembling, threaded with sorrow. "Daniel," she whispered again, softer this time. Then a pause. "Don't take him. Please." He watched her face, pale in the firelight, and a chill passed through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Whoever Daniel was, he wasn't just a memory. He was a wound. And wounds like that didn't stay buried long in a land where everyone carried a gun and a reason. Eli rose quietly, checked the latch on the door, then went to the window. The night was still. The moon cast long silver lines across the snow, each shadow sharp as a blade. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near the ridge, a faint flicker, maybe just the wind shifting the trees. But his instinct stirred. Something out there was watching, waiting. He turned back toward the bed. Clara slept again, her brow smooth now, breath even. He knew he should stay detached, that whatever story she carried could only end in trouble. Yet as he stood there, listening to the fire whisper and the wind settle into silence, he felt something shift inside him, a pull he hadn't felt in years. He draped another blanket over her shoulders, making sure the fire would last till morning. When he finally sat down again, the chair creaked beneath him, the weight of his choices pressing heavier than any saddle. Outside, the snow glittered like glass under the moon. Somewhere beyond the horizon, danger was already stirring, its tracks hidden by the storm. And though Eli didn't yet know it, the name she had whispered in her sleep would soon come riding out of the dust, bringing with it the reckoning neither of them could escape.